Dive into the pulse of Bills football with Turf to Tape, where veteran sideline reporters Sal Capaccio and film room guru Eric Turner deliver a one-of-a-kind podcast experience, combining Sal's unparalleled access to players and coaches with Eric's razor-sharp film breakdowns. The show bridges the gap between casual fans and hardcore enthusiasts. This is Turf to Tape.
This is Turf to Tape, presented by Thin Man Brewery. I'm your host, Eric Turner, as always, joined by my man, Sal Capaccio from WGR. Sal, good afternoon, buddy.
Hey, buddy, how are you? A lot going on, a lot of changes, obviously, the last week or so.
Yeah, it's a little different. We don't have to do this all that often, so it's kind of getting back into a different mode, a different plan of attack. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the assistant coaching hires from the Bills. And so we're going to give a nice little rundown on each of these coaches that we know on both sides of the ball, but also kind of give you some, a little in-depth stuff about scheme 4-3 versus 3-4. So if you guys are looking for that type of content, you came to the right place. So let me start off with the hiring of these coaches and just your overall thoughts and reactions to the coaches they brought in and really the mindset behind those coaches going forward.
Well, when the more you sit back and think about it, I think obviously the Bills didn't have an issue with the offense, right? Because otherwise you don't promote Joe Brady to be a head coach.
Yeah.
If you have an issue with the offense, then that doesn't happen. So I think they feel good about that, but there's going to be some changes anyway on that side of the ball. And I think what Joe's done here is he's, brought in and surrounded himself with people that obviously he's familiar with him. Pete Carmichael Jr., first and foremost, they've been together a long time. They were together, I should say, and he's been under Sean Payton for a long time and together, and that whole connection goes way back. Even if you look at Pete Carmichael's resume, he looks like he's probably in the 70s. He's not. He's 54 years old. He goes all the way back to Drew Brees in San Diego. So that's one. And then Pat Meyer on the offensive line, a guy that actually coached under Aaron Kromer in Buffalo. And I think a lot of that translates then the techniques, the teachings, and we've talked a lot about Kromer and his style. I think that'll, translate well to the players that are already on the team. But I think more than obviously anything is the defensive side of the ball, where a lot of the changes were made and are still being made. And now we know Jim Leonard's the defensive coordinator, and it feels like there's just a complete kind of defensive mind shift and overhaul from personnel to scheme that we'll talk about here in this podcast. And what really strikes me is that I think Joe Brady is trying to find, and I don't know if age necessarily, but I think I would feel comfortable saying younger, creative people who've been around both the college and NFL game, who have a real kind of good knowledge base of how a lot of different things are happening around football.
Yeah, I think he's going a little younger, going a little more innovative. There's some old school coaches in there. There's no doubt about it when it comes to what they teach. But overall, I felt like especially if we're talking defensive side, overall, he's gone to the aggressive mindset and a complementary, mindset. When you're thinking about him becoming the head coach, along with calling the plays, bringing in Pete Carmichael, as you said, a guy that has done this for a very long time, and a guy that can come in and call plays at the drop of a dime. And so that's nice for him to kind of free him up, especially when you're talking about day-to-day stuff as a head coach, running drills, making sure the entire offensive staff's going in the same direction. I like that about Carmichael, and he's done it before. But also the defensive side, again, going younger, going, from some of the college game, bringing Leonard over from Denver, but he was with Wisconsin for many years as a defensive coordinator. Valai, obviously, coming over from Oklahoma. We're going to get to him later. Overall, the game has evolved, right, Sal? The players evolve. A lot of the NFL game, the concepts and plays and ideas and thoughts actually trickle down from the high school level, the college level, into the NFL level. It's not usually the other way around. And so bringing in guys like Jim Leonard, bringing in guys like Jay Valai that have taught the younger generation and know how to teach the younger generation, to me, really stood out on that side of the ball. Again, the game evolves, the players evolve, the teaching and how you teach it evolves. And when we talk about Valai later, when you look at some of the clinics that Jim Leonard has on YouTube and on social media, it's the teaching that just stands out to me. And I love that about what Brady did on that side of the ball.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's, a connectivity these days between some of these guys that were, recently in college or coach college football, I should say, that, people have much more respect for now than maybe back in the day, right? Back in the day, it's just such a line between college football and the NFL. Lines are blurred now in a lot of different ways. You have colleges, NIL and portal and all that. Yeah. But I mean, like, how many times we see concepts filter from high school to college to the NFL, and it's really not the other way around. A lot of it comes up from there. And then what these people are being taught. I remember a few years ago, the big talking point at the combine was not being able to find offensive linemen that ever put their hand down, because colleges were just going with 2-point stances all the time. Right. Yeah. So now when you have a guy like Jim Leonhard, who's not far removed from the college game, and he's been in the NFL, you've got Jay Valai, excuse me. And obviously at several different big time college programs, they understand a lot of the techniques that these college coaches and college programs and players have been using that are translating to the NFL. And I think it's going to be super interesting to watch all of this unfold.
Yeah, it's especially this defensive side. Let's start there. Jim Leonhard, I think the hire was a home run, bringing a guy in again with his innovation, with his attention to detail. It's unlike any other defensive coordinator, especially if you're talking coming up from the college ranks, obviously still with the Broncos the last couple of years, but talk about him as a coach, what he could bring that maybe we didn't have aside from scheme, because we'll get to the scheme stuff, that maybe that's something that is different than we had under Sean McDermott or even Leslie Frazier when he was here.
Well, I think the hallmark of a Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier, Bobby Babbitt defense has always been, don't allow explosives. Keep everything in front of you. Make sure you're sound fundamentally. Live to fight another day. Live to fight another play. And look, the stats bear out. They've done a good job of that for the most part. They allowed one 40-plus yard pass play this entire year. That's amazing.
Yeah,
when you think about it, right? They don't get beat on explosives, but with that comes sometimes allowing a little too much underneath. And if you don't tackle properly and have good tackling days, things can get away from you. And we all know that they've had struggles against the run. It's not by design necessarily, but we do know because they go with a lighter, more athletic defense, that can happen sometimes. I think what you're going to see in a change here is looking for the bigger play more often. Now, the Bills have been good at getting the ball. The turnovers this year wasn't as good as the last few years, but they've been good at, creating some turnovers. But I think you're now looking for a bigger game-changing type of impact plays. But with that could come a risk too of giving up some more explosive plays. So I think that's going to be one of the shifts. And of course, alignment-wise, which we're going to talk about, a lot is made about 4-3, 3-4. I think sometimes too much is made about that, Eric, because this isn't the 1980s or 90s where, oh my God, there's a 4-3, there's a 3-4. It is so all it might be is literally a guy standing up or going down a 3-point stance, which how you want to take a look at it. And there's ways to kind of really massage and navigate all that.
It just, when you listen to other coaches that coached against Jim Leonhard or players that have played in this scheme or against his scheme, they always say two different things. One, that his defenses are intelligent and that they process information quickly. And to me, that starts with the head coach. That starts with the staff, positional coaches, everyone that has their hands on these players. And it's especially awesome because you think about the different schemes, as we'll get to, that he plays, the different fronts. It's hybrid. It's at times it was just straight odd front, old school 3-4, in his early regime at Wisconsin. We're going to talk about that structure and what that actually means. But again, to me, it comes back to the teaching. When you watch some of these clinics that he put on for other coaches, again, sharing information, refining his craft, traveling across the country to clinics, to other schools, what you see when he teaches is that he has different approaches to it for these guys to understand, whether it's coaches or players of this generation. And it's very much like when Brian Daboll installed his offense in Buffalo. It's very conceptual. It's not, the old passing game, Don Coryell passing game was a number system, 754. Those are your 3 routes. Everyone else falls in line with those 3 routes. Brian Daboll and the Earhart Perkins said, no. We're going to have 1 to 2 play names, and you're going to know what those mean as far as concepts go, and then you're learning it conceptually. Flip that to the defensive side of the ball. That's what Jim Leonhard's going to bring. It's conceptual. It's modular. We can run the same field safety blitz from a multitude of alignments. It's just different guys lined up there. Okay, whoever is the force player in this alignment, you're the field safety blitzer. And so it's a lot quicker for these guys to process, to understand. And there's such an ingrained rule base to their scheme and structure that it makes it easy for these kids to play fast.
Yeah, for sure. I remember, and Jim Leonhard does come from Rex Ryan's defense, right?
Yes.
But I do know Rex Ryan's defense is very complicated. And,
Yes.
I think that as it got later on in his career, I think some of those complications really held back the ability to play as fast as you wanted to play.
100%.
There were so many different rules you had to remember.
So true.
And football has changed so much. You can't do that. You got to do things so much on the fly. We talk a lot about positionless players these days, right? Because you got to understand what to do if you are on the inside, the outside, the nickel, the boundary, like all these things. And
How they relate, right?
That's right. You got to kind of know everything, right? And
Yes.
there was, I think, a lot. I remember when Rex was here, and I remember he was known to have this great defense, but I was in a preseason production game meeting one time, and he was explaining some of the things they were doing. I'm like, I don't know how these guys can think of all that before the ball is snapped.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think there has to be some sort of way to make sure that you don't put your players in a bind like that, so they can be ready to play right at the snap of the ball, obviously, and understand everything a lot quicker.
And that's what's so beautiful about what Jim Leonhard does, because anywhere Rex went, Jim Leonhard followed because he was so smart. He was the Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde of the Rex Ryan defense. He was so smart. He could think on his toes. And that's why his defenses kind of emulate that. But he understood that it was so complicated. And he admitted it in one of the clinics. It was so complex that at times it could be overwhelming. So that's why when he installs his defense, he's got that in mind. He's been through that. He understands that I can't overcomplicate things if I want my guys to play faster. That's exactly why I like his defense. It's conceptual, it's modular. But the big talking point this offseason, Sal, is the odd front, a 3-4 defense versus a 4-3 defense. So I want to kind of show some visuals, something that Jim Leonhard uses a bunch, some visuals on the differences in the defense. And we're not going to get too in depth and too into the weeds on this, but obviously this 3-4 front is usually 3 defensive linemen. You have a nose tackle, 2 defensive ends, and outside linebackers, and then 2 off the ball linebackers. And this is a 5-man surface. And you have to you have to think about it that way. The spacing, the surface. Okay. An even front of 4-3 is 4 down linemen. That's a 4-man surface. This odd front is a 5-man surface. And a lot of times the traditional 3-4 Sal, right, is you're having the D ends and the nose tackle, usually 2 gapping, depending on what direction the ball goes. They're 2 gapping, making decisions. The linebackers off the ball are playing off of them. So there's a lot more that goes into this defense when we're talking those D ends and nose tackles, stacking and reading and reacting. It's not a up the field defense like we'll talk about here in a second with that 4-3 or nickel front that McDermott played. So you need guys, especially in those interior defensive line positions, that read plays, read where the ball is going, react properly to blocks, and then shed blocks. And that's a lot different than what the Bills have been playing the last few years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think read and react sometimes can have a pretty negative connotation, to a lot of people when they think about it. There's no doubt. But it's going to require a little bit of a different type of mindset than I think that some of these Bills players have been having already. And then even different skill set, different body types, all those things that we're going to kind of investigate and see how they want to operate and go about it. But again, one thing the Bills did under, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott over the last 9 years is really try to find players who are versatile, players who can do a lot of different things. It's been a talking point. They trained Terrell Bernard at weak and middle linebacker. His first game he ever started was at weak side linebacker, right? I mean, we know that. There are players on this team who can do a lot of different things, but it might just have to be fine tuning and tweaking. Okay, I'm not attacking now. I am reading, reacting. Now, where do I go? And what do I do? Do I tie up here? Do I shoot the gap there? And these are all things that are going to have to now be maybe a little bit different. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a great thing. We don't know how it's going to work out. But I do think it's super intriguing to know that it's a totally different type of mindset.
Yeah. And as we move forward in this scheme spotlight presented by Thin Man Brewery. So again, read and react is more of the mindset that these guys on an odd front, typically that Jim Leonhard has run. And to keep in mind, is it going to be 100% one lane, odd front, 3-4? No, but just the guys they hired gives you an idea that they do plan to approach it from an odd front stance, getting an outside linebacker coach and an inside linebacker coach. So they're telling you that, hey, there are going to be some odd front elements. So let's kind of differentiate, what that means as far as compared to, the Sean McDermott defense. And obviously with their defense as a 4-3, or nickel defense over the last few years, but an over front is, let me see here, get to the proper one first. There we go. So they were a 4-3 over defense the last few years. All right. So that 3 technique at Oliver was always on the outside shoulder of the guard to the strength of the formation where the tight end is. And of course, this is a one gapping system, right, Sal? So everybody has a gap. Everyone plays fast. They shoot up the field. You always heard attack oriented, and they want everyone just coming downhill. And so again, that is the major difference between the 3-4 and the 4-3 is that, hey, you need to get up the field rather than trying to read the play. Of course, there's some reading going on, but you're playing fast. You're getting into your gap. And at times last year and over the last few years, that kind of hurt the Bills because they're playing so fast and getting downhill that guys are missing tackles or they're creating these creases and wedges where running backs are hitting them for explosive plays. And I think that it was part of the reason, on top of them overall as a front seven being a little lighter. And then just what they stress philosophically on defense is creating havoc and creating those tackle for losses and creating those plays in the backfield. Whereas in a 3-4, when you're playing more at the line of scrimmage, you're reading and reacting at the line of scrimmage, not necessarily penetrating the line of scrimmage. You're likely not to get as many plays in the backfield. But again, you're limiting the plays, especially if you're talking run, which has really been the Achilles heel of the Bills defense the last few years. You're getting more plays that are shut down up the middle in a 3-4 versus a 4-3.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you're a little bit lighter, which the Bills are built like that, and you're running this type of defense, when you do attack, then if you get blocked, you'd swallow up at all. That's how it creates those big running lanes. And I think that's been the issue with the run game. Whereas, in the last few years, when the Bills have been not as good against the run, a lot of times it's that, which is guys, they might be trying to fill their gap, but they get blocked because they're getting eaten up by somebody who's a bigger person than them. And then all of a sudden, once you're going up the field, now there's nobody behind you. And now they're getting to the second level for sure. So I do think that this is a defense then that maybe they'll be going to that says, okay, we're not going to get caught in those situations. And we're going to be able to meet the guy in the hole a little bit better because we're reading, we're reacting, then we're kind of getting to where we're supposed to be that way instead of flying up the field and then creating maybe a lane behind us because we get blocked out of the play.
It was really like all or nothing for many years when it came to the run defense. Correct. And, that even front, that 4-3 front, that nickel front, there were so many creases that were allowed. It was really all or nothing. It was a tackle for loss, a havoc play, or an explosive run for the offense. And so a lot of talk is personnel. Who's going to fit where? Can they do this? Can they do that? But I also want to, kind of slow the game down a little bit and explain kind of what you led off with is that, this isn't the old school Rex Ryan defense. This isn't an old Pittsburgh Steelers 3-4 steel curtain defense. There are ways for the Bills to take what they've done and with the personnel that they have and just tweak a few things by the coaching staff up front to kind of combine and run a more hybrid front. And again, that 3-4 front I showed you at the beginning, a small little change like this by the Bills, which is something they have done over the last couple of years in certain situations when opposing offenses had 12 personnel and they had those tight ends in line, or they ran 21 personnel, is go to their 4-3, but put one of their outside linebackers up on the line of scrimmage to make that 5-man surface. Again, the spacing is the most important thing, that 5-man surface, and not have guys, the 3 interior defensive linemen, all 2 gapping. You can tweak it just a little bit to have maybe just your nose tackle or the strong side defensive end as the 2 gappers, and everyone else, like the 3 tech here, to the weak side of the formation. Think about it. That's at Oliver. He's one gap. He's getting up the field. Your weak side end could be Hoyt Rousseau. He's upfield. The D end here, what the Bills were doing is having Rousseau as kind of that 5 tech or 4-eye tech to the strong side of the formation. So there are things that I want to highlight that the staff can kind of combine Jim Leonard's scheme with what the Bills have done the last few years, but also more importantly, maximize the personnel they have, because they can't have an overhaul, especially up front in the front 7, to their defense. So they got to come up with ways, coaching wise and scheme wise, to kind of combine both.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm thinking about different players and how they fit in. And we've all been doing that a little bit here lately. And I think that there's just a bit of a overreaction to this guy fits here, this guy doesn't fit there, because you can find spots for guys to fit, right? Like Deion Walker, as you see on your screen here, and people, you can highlight him. Deion Walker. I think obviously everybody's thinking about Michael Hoyt and where he could fit into this for sure. But there's guys up front And Ed Oliver doesn't have to, he doesn't have to be a true like anchor nose tackle on a 3-4.
No.
He'd be a penetrating nose tackle on a 3-4. He could still do something like that.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing. There are things you can do with the coaching staff, and you can see this from last year. This is a 5-man surface. The Sam linebackers, Dorian Williams, up on the line of scrimmage. So this is, again, kind of combining some of those 3-4 elements with that 5-man surface, but using the personnel that you have, and you're not asking everyone to kind of two-gap when it comes to, this scheme. So it's I know it can be overblown. It's going to be the talking point this entire offseason. 3-4 versus 4-3. Can this guy two-gap? This guy can't. Again, it's going to be up to the coaching staff. There's one thing that, after doing research on this coaching staff, the guys they brought in, the thing I do believe is that they're going to adjust the scheme to fit the players. That's what all the good coaches do. This is what this coaching staff does individually. You can see that in their stops and where they've gone. And so I do believe I said on social media, we're going to waste a lot of time talking about 3-4 versus 4-3. But the biggest thing that we need to realize is the mindset. The biggest thing is the mindset of going from a up the field, attack mindset to a, hey, we're a little more read and react and watch how the play is unfolding and then go get the ball. I think that is the biggest transition that we need to talk about, more so than the 3-4 versus 4-3.
So when people bring that up, they say, okay, if it's read and react, it's not as quick to attack right away. How do the Denver Broncos have so many sacks, right? How do they do that? How did they come up with that? So it doesn't, that's why I think that doesn't have to be a negative connotation to read and react. Once you know what's happening, you get there, you go fast, you get right. And you need dudes, you need guys who are good players to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's always going to be about the Jimmies and the Joes, right? There's no doubt about it. Putting those guys in the position to make those plays. And so with that scheme spotlight over, again, it's going to be a talking point all off season. And trust me, I love doing it. And, that's why I like this show, because we kind of slow it down and teach the average listener or average viewer a little bit about the game and really just kind of isolate what they need to pay attention to going forward, whether that's in the draft or, as training camp unfolds this offseason. But this segment was brought to you by Thin Man Brewery. And if you haven't heard, Mafia Light is different. It hits with just 3.5% ABV and only 80 calories per 12-ounce can. Drinks like water with notes of beer. It's the first craft Pilsner of its kind brewed and packaged right here in Western New York. A true game changer for local beer lovers. We appreciate them, this entire season and going into next year. We appreciate them sponsoring this segment. And if you haven't yet, get to your local beverage center to try Mafia Light. So with that said, let's get into another one of the assistants that Jim Leonhard brought on, and another guy that I've been diving into a bunch of the clinics that he taught over the years as the co-defensive coordinator and secondary coach at Oklahoma. So what did you hear about Jay Valai coming over to the Bills to coach the secondary?
I know that as a player, he was a dog in college. That's one of the things that came out. And he actually played at Wisconsin, but he didn't cross over with Jim Leonhard. Right. But I'm sure they have, mutual contacts there or whatever. And it's a guy that they would know there. Again, a guy that I think brings, which is Joe Brady's theme, high energy. The personality of him will fit to what Jim Leonhard wants to bring. And, he's a guy that's going to be really interesting fitting in to take over for who I thought did a very good job, Jamil Adai. He did. Who's actually heading over to the Miami Dolphins. The Bills are losing a good coach and Jamil Adai. And, I'm interested to see what Jay Valai can bring.
Yeah, when you said he's intense, he's a dog. He comes across that way in his clinics and the way he teaches. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this because it's something that is just, it's so evident in his clinics and his personality. He's clear, he's concise, he communicates well. He uses a multitude of ways to get his point across when he's teaching a technique. And I have a video. I want to play a couple seconds of it because, it just shows the type of guy that they're bringing onto this staff. So listen in.
Flow away, final 5, last threat back. I'm playing basically 2-man at that point, right? I'm in cover 2. I'm taking the final threat back. So understand what route deletion really is. Quarters over here, all right? We're in quarters over here for this concept. You get the drive route. What am I doing as a safety in the corner, right? Well, guess what? He runs a dig. There's one vertical threat with the under, right? It's a dig or it's going to be a 7-cut. The safety nails down on the dig. Corner's got to be the aggressor versus protector. He's got to protect the safety driving on the dig. And right now, it's middle field open. So if I'm a quarterback dropping back right now, I see middle field open and it's quarters, I'm throwing the big post. So if I'm a smart corner, what am I going to do? Close the middle of the field. All right. Great example here. When I was at, and here's animation, which I've done my whole entire career. Show my guy Con over here has done a tremendous job with me as well too now, showing the animation. Once again, if you're a coach, you're a teacher. So there's different.
If you're a coach, you're a teacher. That is, I remember years ago when the Bills got rid of Rex Ryan and they're doing their coaching search. That was, I said two things. I want an offensive-minded coach that is a great teacher. And there's no doubt that Leonhard and Valai are those guys. Just in this minute clip, 46-second clip, you saw 3 different versions of a visual to teach the players. And he's right. And listen to the back half of this, because, you know, if you're a coach, you're a teacher.
Different ways to teach guys. You got to meet them where they're at. One thing Coach V always talks about, meet the guys where they're at. Not where you're at, where they're at, their level, eye level. You guys understand? So here, perfect example. We're at Rutgers here. One of my
onto the film,
jobs,
showing the same exact stuff with the film.
But we're at Rutgers here on the backside, the bottom here. We're in cover 4. All right, we get the drive concept, right? Number 1 runs that under, 2's on the dig. Right now, Damon lines up. Originally, he's on the 36-yard line. 36, all right? He goes here. He sees his dig, aggressive protector, safety nails down, runs through the first post, goes all the way backside to the backside post, all right? So he starts on 35, ends up on opposite 25. That's making the play, all right? Now, as great as your job, Avery Young did a great job picking the ball off here. You know, that was great, but the plus really got to Damon because, once again, Damon deleted the middle of the field, destroyed the picture, post-snap for the quarterback. Either way, we're in a great position to make a play on this.
I just love that. Again, the different ways he got his point across. You know, he showed that first slide and the rules and what they're trying to teach in specific coverages. Then he had the little animation with the PowerPoint and then the film. Like, that is covering himself as a teacher to teach the guys in that positional room how he wants things done and what it looks like from a different 4 different ways, essentially. And to me, that is what I want in a coach, in a coordinator, in a secondary coach. And you know what? As a secondary coach with the Bills, he's got some pretty good talent in that room. And so I'm excited to see what he can do with that.
And the Bills finished number 1 in the league in pass defense this year, right? I mean, you can't get any better than that statistically. I think people would like to see maybe a little bit more ball hawking from that group. That'd be something I think that needs to be, and I don't know, sometimes I'm going to say improved on, but there were times last year where I just felt there was just too much space given. And they did a good job of keeping things in front of them. And as the year went on, they did a better job of that. There's no doubt. But I think that's an area where they'll probably have a little bit more concentration this year.
And that's why they brought in a guy like Jim Leonhard, you know, with his expertise in the secondary, Jay Valai with his expertise. One of his main sayings is create turbulence. And for many years, you've heard fans, I'm sure, call into your show saying, hey, there's too much. They're playing off coverage too much, or, you know, they're playing too soft. Well, the guys that they brought in on that side of the ball teach the exact opposite. You talked about earlier on the scheme of McDermott was always, you know, cap the coverage, not allow those explosive, the scheme. Well, it goes even further when we're talking Jay Valai and Jim Leonhard. They don't want just the scheme doing that. They want individual players when they're playing cover 3 match where a zone turns a man. As soon as that becomes man coverage because the route's going down the field, he wants them taking away any cushion, any open space, get right in the face, create that turbulence, whether it's getting physical with them, getting the leverage on them, and just schematically overall. I think that is where we're going to see the difference in the coverage schemes of the Bills. They're going to not just going to play that soft zone. They're going to play zone until they realize, based on the route distribution, that it should be man. Then those guys are connecting and making plays on the ball. And that is something that Jim Leonhard did at Wisconsin and why he was one of the top defenses as a D coordinator there with third down percentage, and Jay Valai getting turnovers, creating turbulence and turnovers for the defense. Yeah, no doubt. And I think the Bills obviously are trying to have that type of mindset going in with this new group. And that includes a couple, we're going to talk about this, but they have 2 linebackers coaching now, outside and inside, which gives you a little clue, right? That's like, that's a clue on what they're thinking here. No longer is it one linebackers coach, Al Holcomb, coaching the linebackers. It's an outside linebackers coach, an inside linebackers coach, which tells you what? They're 2 different jobs. 2 different jobs. Yeah, they're going to be asking those guys to do something different. And speaking of those coaches, Bobby April the 3rd. If you guys, if that name kind of rings a bell, you wouldn't be wrong, right, Sal? So talk about the outside linebacker coach, Bobby April III.
Yeah, he's a guy that he actually has defensive coordinator experience coming from Stanford. He was at Stanford, coached outside linebackers at Wisconsin. We're talking about guys like Craig Herbig, who played there, obviously Latu, guys that really did a really nice job, not only the college level, but in the NFL level so far at the NFL level. So I just find it interesting that, and by the way, he's been in Buffalo. He actually did coach under Rex Ryan, another guy that coached under Rex Ryan here in Buffalo. He was on his staff for a little while. So I think that's pretty interesting. He is the son of Bobby April, the special teams coordinator, who people remember his name from the Bills, two-time special teams coordinator of the year in the NFL. And that's the bloodlines where he comes from.
Yeah. And he's, I like that he has coordinator experience. And more importantly, I think the run game coordinator title that he's had for Jim Leonhard, I think that is where they're going to rely on him a bunch. I hadn't seen much info on him. I saw that on the University of Minnesota site, he had been hired as a rush coordinator before actually taking the job with the Bills. I couldn't find anything that really showed that, but that's what's showing on the Minnesota website. But again, he's going to be working with those outside linebackers, and typically in the odd front, those are usually rushers. And again, edge guys, defensive end guys playing outside, usually in the 2-point stance, more times than not. But I think when you look into his past, whether it's, with the Bills as an assistant, with his time with linebackers, especially on the edge at Wisconsin, he was a very good recruiter. You mentioned Herbig. He got Daryl Peterson, who's got 8 sacks for he recruited him. He's got 8 sacks this past year. Latu is a safety they got at Hawaii, who was really talented. But I say that because he has an eye for talent. I think he has an eye for talent that he can make work in his scheme at his position or specialty. And so I think that is going to be good for the Bills at, taking guys. Because again, when you're trying to scout or find guys to play the edge in an odd front, they're typically labeled what? Tweeners. They're not quite big defensive ends for 4-3 or even fronts, but they're also not the biggest guys. And when you're talking about playing outside linebacker in a 3-4, because they do at times have to drop into coverage. So they have to have some athleticism. And so I think he's going to be interesting hire. Another guy that, along with Leonhard and Valai, has a ton of clinic tape that I urge you guys to go out there and watch it. You're going to learn a lot about football and what it takes to coach a position, to learn the position, and you'll have a higher respect for these coaches and players. And so I'm excited about him. Again, another stint in Buffalo. Anyone else on that side of the ball you want to talk about as far as coaches go?
Well, we know also the Bills have hired John Iguagwu,
Yes.
and I want to say his name right, Igurugwu, sorry.
Yep.
He will be the inside linebackers coach. That's what he coached with the New York Giants for the last, 4 years? And he was also with the Bills, interestingly enough, under Sean McDermott.
Yeah,
he coached,
started his regime, right?
Yep, the defensive quality control coach, and then he moved to assistant linebackers coach for a few years under Sean McDermott. So he also has familiarity here in Buffalo. And honestly, he was here when the Bills, drafted and developed Matt Milano. So that's a nice feather in his cap to say that. So he'll have some familiarity with some of the guys as well.
And that's what's interesting about him having his stint in Buffalo and the way the Bills were transitioning from the odd front to more of an even front. So again, he's seen that. He's helped develop Milano, I believe Edmonds as well. And so that'll be another coach that can help that transition, that can kind of translate, what they're looking for at that inside linebacker position. One that is going to be interesting and a talking point all offseason, right, Sal, when it comes to Terrell Bernard, when it comes to Dorian Williams, Joe Andreessen, where do those guys fit in this, quasi hybrid odd front? Because I'm sure you're already getting calls on the shows and your podcasts about it. For sure. And
I've maintained for a while that maybe Terrell Bernard fits better as a 4-3 weak side linebacker as it is. But his true fit might literally be 3-4 inside linebacker more than a true 4-3 Mike. So I think that this is really interesting and how the Bills want to piece this together. And I think, like I said before, the good news is you have people who've already been being kind of versatile and flexible and trained at different positions. And then you have kind of that chess piece, Michael Hoyt, who we don't really know what the Bills are going to want to do with him. And he could stand up or he can, be off the ball or on the edge or whatever. And I think all of that, you may want to, because you have him, that might impact what you do with somebody else along the defensive line or linebacker spot.
Yeah. And the off the ball linebackers, those 2 linebackers, there's a 5-man surface, the 2 linebackers off the ball, how they situate the front, the guys along the D line is going to impact where you're going to put a Terrell Bernard or a Dorian Williams or Joe Andreessen or anyone they bring in, because there are certain bubbles that the fronts kind of open up. And so you don't necessarily want Terrell Bernard to be exposed to a stacked gap and no one, taking and keeping him clean. And so I think that'll be interesting, because in college, he played in a similar front to what Jim Leonhard puts out there. It was, under Dave Aranda, of course, a big Sean McDermott guy, but it was this front. And so he did a lot of these things that he's going to see in Jim Leonhard's defense that we assume. And one of those things is rushing the passer. It's something that a lot of the linebackers that played at Wisconsin did from that off the ball, from that Mike or weak side inside linebacker position. And I think Terrell Bernard, that helps him. I think that only augments what he can bring when he is healthy. You just got to stay healthy.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think there was a lot more to how banged up he was this year that impacted his play.
Agreed.
It's not an excuse. It happens. I think it's what people, but you have to understand, like, he was pretty banged up this year, and it really impacted his play. And Shaq Thompson did a great job, obviously. And that's another guy. He's going to be a free agent and not really sure where he fits, if he does at all. He wants to keep playing. He loved playing in Buffalo, but a lot of decisions to be made.
So you mentioned Pete Carmichael. We'll flip to the offensive side of the ball, and a couple of things I want to talk about with him after doing some research on him. And yes, the experience is great. He's kind of been in this role, and he can help, be the right-hand man of Joe Brady now, not Sean Payton. But when you're thinking about what he does on a day-to-day basis or how he impacts game day, of course, if something were to happen, Joe Brady, he can't call a play, or he's coaching something up. Obviously, Carmichael can jump in there and call the play. But what I also like is it's another voice in the ear of Joe Brady when he is worrying about all these things as head coach down on the sideline. Hey, you're calling that play too often. You're spamming that play too often. We need to get to something else. Or, hey, you just called this play, but we probably shouldn't be running that because we didn't get enough time, or this isn't the look that worked. It worked well against. You better call a timeout. You're having that person in your ear that you trust to really lean on. And I like having Carmichael as that guardrail for first-time head coach and Joe Brady.
So Matt Bove and I, we interviewed Joe Brady on It's Always Game Day in Buffalo, the podcast I do with him yesterday, about 20 minutes. And specific question we asked was, what does an offensive coordinator do when he's not the play caller? And Joe Brady immediately said, be ready to call plays. That's what he said. Be ready to call plays. He said, because you never know. There's a situation where I can't call plays. I'm managing the game, but he's got to step in and call plays. And that's an extreme example that could happen, of course, but he's got to be ready to call plays. So the point he's making is he's got to be very much aligned with how the play calling has got to go in that particular game, series to series, down to down.
Yeah. And Carmichael, as the OC, is going to be responsible for a lot of that menu. The coaches always call it a menu, what plays in certain situations, whether it's red zone, third down, those 2-minute situations. He creates that menu for Joe Brady, and they create it together. They collaborate because, like you said, he has to be ready to make those calls in the proper sequencing and moments in a game. My question, I don't know if you've heard, is Carmichael going to be up in the booth where Joe Brady used to sit? Is he going to be on the sideline? What'd you hear about that?
I don't think we did ask Joe. Like, he basically said every team is different. I don't know if he gave a complete answer on that, or we don't know yet. So
yeah,
I think that'll just kind of depend on. We also don't know, like, there's other people on staff as of right now. We're sitting here that if they're going to be a part of the staff or not a part of the staff, right?
It's true.
Running backs coach Kelly Skipper, tight ends coach Rob Boris, like Austin Gunn, the assistant offensive line coach. So, we'll see how all that fits together, because there's going to be maybe that could impact where Carmichael is, depending on who else is available to be upstairs or downstairs.
No doubt. All right. So wide receiver coach, any words on wide receiver coach Drew Terrell?
Yeah, it is Terrell. I made sure I told people. Somebody gave me a little crap on Twitter because I'm like, well, look, I mean, it was actually the Bills made sure to put out how the new wide receivers coach and tell me how it was. So I want to make sure everybody else knew it was Terrell, not Terrell. So anyway, it's important to say people's names right.
Yeah, I agree.
So Drew Terrell is the new wide receivers coach. He was with Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Arizona Cardinals, and their passing game. He was their passing game coordinator the last few years. Before that, he was with the Washington Commanders, and Terry McLaurin obviously had his best 2 seasons, I think, as a pro, he could argue, under Drew Terrell. And look, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. did not progress.
Right.
Terry McLaurin did. I think it's always important to never pin like this one season, this one player, the development on any one person and anything for a coach. There's so many factors that go into a coach's success or failure. So for anybody who says, oh my God, Marvin Harrison Jr. just wasn't great under this guy. Well, then you could say, well, Terry McLaurin was, right? Or you could look at the vice versa, whatever you want to say. I think you just need to get guys in here because every situation is different.
Right. And, each team's different. Each positional group is different. And the one takeaway I got from him is it was that he kind of was important to Terry McLaurin and Marvin Harrison Jr.'s mindset, the mental stability, because Marvin Harrison Jr. this past year dealt with like 2 or 3 injuries that he would start to get going. He'd start to get some games together and then get hurt. And that, that really fractured his mindset in the season. And I think Drew Terrell, based on what Marvin Harrison Jr. has told the media, played a big role in that. And going back to his time with Washington, with Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel, he helped McLaurin because McLaurin has some emotional swings. He would have these outbursts by all accounts in Washington. And Terrell was another guy that helped him frame the game and help him on a day-to-day basis deal with some of the ups and downs of the game and the emotional swings of the game. And because McLaurin would get so mad for all the work he'd put in and then the results weren't there, whether it's production or whether it's route running. And so that is my major takeaway with Terrell. Obviously, it's a wait and see approach about if he can develop wide receivers, what's his expertise. That a lot of that is to be determined. But overall, it seemed like he was dealing with receivers with their mindsets and keeping them on the play ahead where their feet are in the ground at that moment when we're talking Marvin Harrison Jr. and Terry McLaurin. So anyone else on that side of the ball, the offensive line coach, I think you mentioned at the top. I do like him. There's a lot of crossover with him and Cromer, obviously, but also he is a guy that has learned from some of the best, the Howard Mudds, the Jim McNallys. He takes a lot of the Mount Rushmores of offensive line coaches, and he brings a little bit of each of them to his style.
No doubt. And I think that's what the best coaches do. The best teachers do. They take a little bit of everything and they try to kind of, take a little piece here, a little piece there. It's not one style fits all. And your one way to teach everybody usually doesn't work because everybody learns differently. And maybe you could take something you learned from somebody in your past to be able to do that. One thing that, stood out for Joe Brady when we talked to him on the Always Game Day in Buffalo podcast was at the very end, him talking about how, and the question was basically when you become a head coach, you have to coach guys a little differently maybe than when you're the coordinator. The relationship's different, being hard on guys. There was a lot of talk about you got to have somebody hard on Josh Allen and coach guys hard. And he said, I think I can coach guys hard because I've developed a relationship with them. What he said, though, was interesting, and I agree with this. I've always said this as a teacher when I was teaching and coaching. Some guys, and he used me as an example here, he said, Sally might have to ride his butt. Maybe Matt, you have to be a little bit more of a leaning shoulder, right? Like, that's going to be important for Joe Brady. It's going to be important for all the assistants he hires. And I think Joe wants to hire guys who understand that it can't be just, this is the one way we do it, and this is how I coach you and teach you, and too bad if you don't like it. They have to understand they're dealing with different people, different body types, different personalities, and the best coaches are the best teachers.
Yeah, that was a great point on your podcast, and something I didn't think about when he was talking about being in Carolina, going through COVID, and how what he learned from going through COVID and only having to do Zooms and not being in the same room and joking with the guys and getting to know them. I thought that was very insightful and something I hadn't really heard about him, and how he learned that when he gets back into the building and coaching, he wanted to focus on those interpersonal relationships with the players so that he could coach them hard and be honest with them and critique them without, any hard feelings. And that was a great segment by you guys and great questions. It was a good podcast. If you guys haven't watched or listened to that, get to Sal's YouTube channel and catch up on that. It was a very good one that I, took in this morning on my way to work.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It's going to be interesting seeing this offseason, how it plays out. You got a couple of pivot points along the way. The combine is coming up. The owners' meetings, that's more on the business side of things for sure, but we'll learn more. We always hear from coaches and GMs at all of these kinds of things. And in between there is free agency. And I think it's going to be wild this year to kind of think about how the Bills are going to try to structure the vision of their 2026 team.
And yes, we expect some changes, whether it comes to personnel, whether it comes to the philosophy of the coaches and their the way they teach things and go about things. But I think it's safe to say that we're expecting a little different approach from Brandon Beane in this front office. And real quick, before I get you out of here, what's your thoughts on, Brandon Beane and what him and Brady, they've been doing a lot of media the last week or so. Give me your thoughts on that and some of the insight that they've offered. Obviously, Brady came on your show, Bean had done a bunch of shows as well. And what type of insight we're getting from that little media tour by the Bills front office.
Yeah. And by the way, Joe Brady will be on Jeremy and Joe tomorrow morning. And then Brandon Bean will be on Thursday morning with them. So people can hear both of them. I think it's really interesting how Brandon Bean has been talking. And if you can get some clues, I'm getting this feeling that he is going to take some swings this offseason. And I do think that wide receiver is very much in the window for them to be aggressive with. If you listen to him, he was with Josh Reed as well on Channel 4. And there was a quote in there. He said, like, it's his job to make sure Josh isn't throwing to guys that look like me and you. That's what he said. Something like that. Wild, right. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting. And then Tyler Dunn did a bunch with both them and talk about the process. And I don't remember not necessarily exact quotes, but I think there was something in there from Brandon Bean about how, Joe really wants to bring a little bit more of a downfield passing game. And that's on Brandon to make sure that he has the tools to be able to do that. So I do think it's going to be a really interesting offseason talking about all of that.
Agreed. That's why I asked. I think there's going to be, he made it clear over the course of the last week or so that he had tried to make moves to help Josh in the offense as far as receiver goes for whatever reasons. And he explained some of them in detail. They fell through, but he made it clear that, hey, I took some swings. So again, I think he's kind of foreshadowing, expect some swings, whether it's with a trade or the draft. But I think overall we can expect some changes as is the case, given new head coach, new philosophy, and going about things. So with that said, what other content you got going on this week? Podcasts, shows, written content. What do you got going on?
Well, I've been doing the Extra Point show every day, 10 to 12. So that continues on this week, but I'll be down. I think we're hearing later this week. Maybe we'll hear from coordinators for the Bills. Awesome. So when that happens, we'll bring that to everybody. So I don't want to pin down a day and time until it's public right now, but I think that's what we're aiming for. And then everybody can hear that. And of course, I'll be doing the Always Game Day in Buffalo podcast with Matt Bove as well. And everybody can follow me on Twitter at Sal Sports.
Awesome. So appreciate you in this episode. Good stuff. We got a lot more coming this offseason, a lot of changes, a lot of good discussion and talks over the next few months. So on behalf of Turf to Tape, presented by Thin Man Brewery, I'm Eric Turner. That's Sal Capaccio.